You said, "Hey, I can't hear you." "Oh, Nicole, hey, turn your mic on, because if you don't turn your mic on, we can't hear you. All we can see is that you are talking a mile a minute because your mouth is moving, but we can't hear you." Anyway, here we go. So, this microphone is a Rode NT something, 9 NT, can't see. Anyway, it's got phantom power. What that means is that through this cable here, power has to come, like, be sent to make it work. It's a condenser mic, and I forgot to turn the power button on. I turn it off when I'm not using it just so I don't lose, like, burn out the mic because it's on 24/7 at my studio. So that's what happened. I was like, la 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 la. Okay, we're gonna start the recording all over again of today's episode of Living Free in Tennessee. And if I make a mistake like I just did where I didn't have the microphone on, good thing I noticed. You know what'd be a real bummer is like you record your whole show and don't notice that the mic's not on. But my garage band over here actually shows the audio levels as I go, so I have a pretty good idea. So let's try this. Take two. If you have questions or comments, put them in all caps on YouTube. And here we go. Well, welcome everyone to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, August 16th, 2021, and I'm tired as can be after spending 8 hours driving to Polyface after roasting coffee and taking a medical preparedness class, and then doing an all-day outdoor thing at the farm there for the Rogue Food Conference. Go Rogue, baby. And then driving another 8 hours home. We got in last night, cooked dinner, and I think I might have been in bed by 7:30. Maybe it was 8:30. I don't know. I was ready for bed at 5, though. I can tell you that. We got home at 4:30, and I said hi to the dogs and just wanted to climb into bed. So today I want to run you through something that happened before I went on the crazy week that was last week. And it's a typical Saturday on the homestead, only it had a little dash of, we can't take extra time doing these things. And it was a day on the homestead in the heat of the summer. So you have this like double thing going on in the summer where, on the one hand, everything's ripe and you need to process it or it will go bad. And on the other hand, you also need to put effort into keeping things alive that are not ready for the dog days of summer. And then added to that, I was getting ready to go out of town for basically a full week. I was home one day last week to basically shake my suitcase into the laundry, do the laundry, put it back in the suitcase, and leave again. But that doesn't really count now, does it? Also, wanted to remind you before we jump into the main topic of today's show that there is a member webinar on August 26th. That's a Thursday. The reason I chose a Thursday is we've been doing them on Saturday, and some people can't come on Saturday and some people can't come on Thursday. It is at 6 p.m. Central Time. That's 5 in Mountain, 4 in Pacific, and 7 in Eastern. And it will be about mozzarella making. The other thing about Thursday is I pick up my milk on Wednesday, so the milk will be nice and fresh and ready to go from the goat for goat mozzarella. So that'll be there. If you want to get signed up, just go over to my website, and on the right-hand side, you'll see a sign up button for that. If you're a member, it's free. If you're not a member, it's $50. And if you're going to pay me $50 for a mozzarella making webinar, you might as well just become a member for $50. And then you can have a couple more webinars that you attend this year. Also, if you have feedback or stump the sauce items, send them over, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. Do that via email. That's the best way to reach me for stuff like that. If you send it in chat on Facebook or MeWe or Float or Telegram, I might remember you talked to me. I also might forget. That's just the way chat works. Text message is the same way. If you send me a text message ordering coffee, you got a 50-50 success rate on that. Emails actually go into the system, and then you're more likely to get what you want or get on the show or any of those other things. If you can't remember how to spell my name or livingfreeintennessee.com, find the website and click on contact, and that form that you fill out comes to me in email as well. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show, Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about eating what you store and much more importantly, storing what you eat. I just got back from a conference, the Rogue Food Conference at Polyface Farm, which was fantastic, and I'm sure there'll be a whole show about everything that happened last week because there was a lot that happened. I learned a lot last week about medical preparedness, and then Rogue Food Conference is always a high point. And then I got to see Polyface Farm for the first time ever, and that was helpful for me to as we get ready to rotate our pigs to see how they rotate their pigs. But I was at this conference and there are a set of attendees who are really, really worried about food shortages coming up and all of the things that have been going on in society. And they're talking through how they're storing food and it's things they don't eat, like MREs. Most people don't eat MREs on a day-to-day basis, or beans and rice, and they don't really eat that on a regular basis. And I can tell you this, if you're starving and beans and rice is what you have, you're totally gonna eat it. But why not build your life in such a way that you can, A, tap into sales at the grocery store if you're a grocery store shopper, or sales at the farmer's market if you're a farm shopper, and get things, a couple times a year for cheaper, and also build it in such a way that if things are not in the store for one day for one reason or another or not available, you have some at home and you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to eat a bunch of stuff you don't like or go on to the most boring diet ever by just simply figuring it out. Like, what does my family eat on a regular basis? And you'll be surprised to learn that you don't eat that much variety. You think you do, you don't. And from there, figuring out how to stock up on those items and rotate it through your pantry so you never have anything going bad and become more disciplined about it. If you do that, then if one day there's no bacon at the store or there's no toilet paper at the store or they're out of your favorite bleach product for your bathroom or whatever it is that happens, you're going to be good to go. A friend of mine reached out to me last night from Oregon talking about the coffee shortage. And we've talked about the coffee shortage on this show, right? There is not a coffee shortage. Here's what's up. It's taking longer to find shippers to ship coffee from the farms, which are mostly in Central and South America and Africa, and ship them from there to here. I guess there's some Asian sources too. But anyway, where they are not is North America. You can get coffee beans in North America. I haven't found any good coffee beans in North America. That shipping is slower. That means that the warehouses of coffee are, becoming more empty as they ship to roasters like me and big roasters, but the crops are still producing. And then there was a freeze in Brazil, and that may have harmed coffee plants, younger coffee plants, right? The older coffee plants are more likely to be able to handle freeze, but the younger plants might have been negatively impacted. Don't know yet. Aren't gonna know till September. But the way it was covered in the media made it sound like all of a sudden you're never gonna be able to get coffee from Brazil again. I had to pay more per pound for my Brazil bean 2 weeks ago because people are panic buying Brazil beans, even coffee roasters. I'm not panic buying anything. If we do not have a good Brazil crop coming in about 2 years, which is about when it would be impacted, it'd be the late 2022 crop, right? It's 2021 right now. Maybe even 2023 before we even notice that there is less Brazil product on the line. I am gonna end up having to reformulate Hollow Roast House Blend to not include Brazil because I can't get it. Therefore, I will choose something from Guatemala or somewhere else that has a nice chocolate flavor because it's that chocolate mouthfeel that's part of the blend in Hollow Roast. Okay? Well, I heard there's no coffee in Portland. Yeah, Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. And I know that's not true. There's just less coffee on the shelves. And that tells me that people listened to the news and went out and stocked up on coffee, which is fine. People who don't just rotate things through their pantry in a manageable way. If you did rotate through in a manageable way, you'd be like, I'll wait a week to get some, or I'll wait 2 weeks to get some as part of my normal buy. That's why we have Tales from the Prepper Pantry here. Now, the Prepper Pantry in the holler is a little bit different because I'm a little more hardcore than most people, and I try to eat as much from my land or farmers near me as I can. and not my goal is to not be going to the grocery store to buy fizzy water or whatever as much as possible. I don't want to buy things at the grocery store. I want to get them from sources I know are healthy and as close as possible, so it's not shipping all over the place, and I know that's impossible for chocolate because chocolate doesn't grow here, right? So there are things or imported cheeses, like, I like me some German cheese sometimes, and I buy it, and it costs a lot of money, and I have to get it at the grocery store at this point. I like me some Italian cheese too from Italy. Same thing, right? But basically most of the things that can grow do grow, I eat here. And I also eat seasonally, which means when broccoli is done, I don't although I have done, I don't typically buy broccoli from the store out of season. I depend on things that are preserved and stored here for when they're not coming fresh out of the garden, and then I have a garden which this year has been nowhere near as big. This year and last year has not been as big as usual, and I have relationships with local farmers who are covering my butt while I grow a coffee business and am not spending as much time in the garden so I can get stuff from them. And that is what led me to this week in the prepper pantry, which is I needed to go out of town. So I last week, leading up to last week, Saturday was my only day before I was going to be out of town for 8 days. Sunday through Sunday, right? That's 8 days. And it didn't mean I wasn't gonna be home at all because I did get to, land here a couple times during that time, but basically, I was out of town, and that means I'm not in the studio recording my podcast. I'm not here recording my thought of the walk. I'm not processing coffee orders. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I am not caring for plants or animals. The good news is I have a partner on the property he's a partner in the homestead, not a romantic partner. And he's able to hold down the fort, take care of my dogs, my cats, the livestock, and keep things watered, right? And keep things going as best he can. So that's good. But I still needed to do a bunch of other work that was required to be gone for a week. So it's almost like you do 2 weeks of work to be gone for a week, and then while I was gone, it was like full on intensive concentration to be gone. And to top it all off, it's summer on a homestead, so tomatoes are coming ripe, basil needs to be processed. I've got squash coming off the plants I need to cook or prepare or preserve or whatever. It's time to get the fall garden stuff back in. I was planting beans. So and then I go to the farmer's market, and because I'm depending on farmers for surplus, I wait until it's, like, way too much for them, and then I buy it cheap, and then I can it or dry it or whatever I'm gonna do, and, of course, that week ended up being tomato bean week. You know what tomato bean week is? That's about the last week I'm gonna get stringless green beans, which are way easier to can than those with strings where you have to pull all the strings off. And while I will have the chance to get my hands on tomatoes, the tomatoes grown by the farms I know are about to be dead. And then my only ability from there to get tomatoes after that are the Amish, and the Amish use chemicals on their crops near us. So they're not organic practices. So I'd rather have the the tomatoes from the guys I know than the Amish tomatoes, which have pesticides, which still are gonna be a little bit better than the stuff you'd get at the store because they haven't traveled all over the world, right? They're fairly fresh and I can wash them off, and it's not like the Amish or anybody really is spraying as much pesticide as possible, but I really want good tomatoes, and I've grown a number of tomatoes and processed some, but I want salsa and I want tomato sauce. So what happened is I found out on Thursday before I left that it was green bean tomato weekend, and I, like, soul searched and soul searched and soul searched, and I was like, "Okay, I'm in a cluster right now because I gotta catch up with everything, get ready for next week, be ready to be out of town, have a booth and all the coffee roasted for Rogue Food Conference, send any orders I can when I'm home for 1 day on Wednesday next week," which means a lot of roasting all at once, and it's tomato bean week. So, of course, being who I am, I was like, balance is my word, and an important part of balance is getting rest. I'll get 2 bushels of beans and 60 pounds of tomatoes to process on top of everything at the homestead. And at the end of the weekend, you know what I had? 34 quarts of green beans, which is enough for me to have for the winter, and I think it'll be enough for the holler neighbors too, because I did less than that last year. We still have some left from last year, but we've finally gotten over the hesitation of people using the green beans for everybody. So I think it's perfect amount. And I now have 60 pounds of tomatoes cored and in the freezer. And guys, this is an important thing about running your homestead. Sometimes you have tomato bean day and you look at what you have to do. You know that one person can't process all of this all the way in one day. And you decide, how do I keep that from going bad so I can get that done? And the cool thing about tomatoes that you always need to know is that, ooh, eye scratch. You need to know that tomatoes can be frozen and then canned. And tomatoes like to be ripe on the hottest day of the year, and canning is hot too. And so it's not always bad if you make sure you have room in your freezer for the dog days of summer, where you put your meat usually, to just core the tomatoes, throw them in the freezer, process them in November when your house is starting to get cold, but it's not quite cold enough to fire up the wood stove or whatever it is. We're not quite doing that. We're gonna make salsa this week from the tomatoes I froze last week, but it's an easy button, and sometimes you need to think that way, and I'm talking about this just because this is how you think about your pantry. So, we've got 34 quarts of green beans canned, and they're not quite put away yet, but they'll be stowed away for winter, and then I have 60 pounds of tomatoes waiting to be salsa'd this week. And then, of course, this is the time of year when goldenrod, mullein, and mint, and things of that nature should be harvested and dried for winter tea. So it is both wild forage time and can all your stuff. So that's what happened from the pantry. As far as using stuff from the pantry, the only thing we're really using from the pantry at this point is jars of canned stuff like meats and things that we need to use up and meat from the freezer. Because right now we're on the meat side, we're in a use it up phase, not a fill it up phase, because I tend to process more animals in winter than summer because guess what? In the winter, it's cold outside and it's easier to keep the meat at a safe temperature. And so we're going to do pig processing in January. We're going to have a class. We're going to have 3 pigs to process. And we'll get those processed in January so that the meat stays cold. Even though we have a freezer we can put it in right as we go. Like we want it to stay cold so that meat stays good and we have high quality meat. So that's my tale from the prepper pantry. Next segment is Operation Independence. This is where I talk about building ongoing local revenue into my life. And last week was 100% about growing the podcast and growing Hollow Roast Coffee to have more stable revenue from a business I'm building. So it's not so much local as just what I'm building myself. And really, it was about going to Rogue Food Conference in Virginia and expanding the reach of our audience who listens to this podcast, as well as finding new coffee customers. Because what I've found is usually once somebody tries Hollow Roast coffee, they don't go back. Or if they do go back, they come back again. And that's because our coffee is roasted differently than most commercial coffees. Even the good commercial coffees you're going to find at the store, we roast with air. And that makes a much more mellow cup, lower acid, easier on your stomach. If you have a heart condition, easier on your heart condition because you're not getting the gas from the heating elements. And that is, it kind of sells itself once we get it out there. So I decided to take a leap of faith and do a booth at Rogue Food Conference. It was also 93 degrees and sunny for a lot of the day. So that's why I'm tired. Things went well. It didn't go as well as I wanted it to from a volume standpoint. I was hoping there would be about 100 more people there. But the people who were there were great and we got to know them. Some of them hadn't heard of my podcast. So we have a few people who will probably pop in this week and check out the podcast and see if they like it. And it's just always fun to get together with a group of people who care about food freedom, because there are a lot of people who don't. And it doesn't make sense to me at all that you wouldn't care about being able to have access to high quality, healthy food. And the problem is the federal government is motivated to centralize food so it's easier for them to oversee the quote unquote safety. In doing this, they set up systems for very large farms, very large corporations that make absolutely no sense for an operator who's my size, right? And then they the messaging around it is somehow you're gonna be poisoned by these small operations if you tap into their food or if you drink raw milk or any of those things. When in reality, when you look at the foodborne illnesses that are out there that have large in that you hear about in the news, go back to the source on those. Start going back to the source. Where is it? Why did it happen? Oh, there's E. coli in lettuce. Oh, it's that same distributor in California that always gets E. coli in their lettuce. And the reason we're hearing about it is it's distributed to like 10 or 15 states and a huge population of people. Wherein in my smaller environment, it's very easy for me to keep fecal matter out of my lettuce because I'm only managing 20 to 30 heads of lettuce at a time. And it's certainly nowhere near where I poop and I wash my hands, full disclosure, I wash my hands. So you tend to have a better attention to detail at the smaller level, and B, less exposure if something goes wrong. And that I think makes a big difference. But what's happened is we've taught the world that if the government doesn't regulate it, it's not safe. And that's simply not true. That's why every time I hear somebody say they're not taking the vaccine because the FDA hasn't approved it, I'm like, why would you think that makes it safe? They don't make other things safe, they make things less safe, especially in the food realm, right? Where they're insisting on practices that kill your food, practices that make your food less healthy and you less healthy, nutritional guidelines that are basically influenced by politics and now racial politics. What does racial politics have anything to do with what's good for a human being to eat? I don't know. I'd much rather eat what I can find that is healthy than depend on something that's got lobbyists and other pressures on it. So that's why I went to that conference. That's why I've supported them since the inception. And I hope if you guys ever get a chance to go to one, you can. There's going to be 2 next year, I think, one in Texas and one in Florida. So they're starting to get around the country. So you don't necessarily have to go as far to go to Rogue Food. But that's all rumor right now. I know they're looking at those locations, but you never know until they book it and find a venue and figure out who's speaking, what it's going to be. So that's Operation Independence for today. Next, it's time for the main topic of today's show, a homestead in summer. This is a day in the life of Nicole Sauce on her 3.1 or 3.2 acre homestead, which isn't very big, is it? You don't need a lot of land to live like I do. You just need to understand the size of your land and not overdo it. When I first moved here, my neighbor, I think I was 2 years in, and I had chickens and other stuff, and he works at the farmer's co-op, and he said, Nicole, and he was always doing things like saying, "You're not from here, are you?" When I would ask for organic feed and other after sources of where things come from, which apparently is a crunchy hippie Oregon thing to do and not a Tennessee thing to do, although that's changing fast. Anyway, he was like, I gotta hand it to you. You did something right when you moved here. And I was like, oh. He said, you didn't do what most people who move from the city do, which is they come out, they get a piece of land about the size of yours, and they throw a bunch of horses and and cows on it. And within a year, it's just one big giant mud bog. And I was like, well, of course I didn't do that. My land's too small for a cow. And cows need more than one cow to be happy. So I'd need 2 cows, right? And by the time I have 2 cows, you're gonna end up with 3 cows because that's how nature works. And then I'm not gonna have anything, but I don't want mud. I watch these horses out in the fields just standing in mud. I'm tore up because my pig pasture has mud at this point. But I've kept it concentrated there for a reason, so the rest of the property isn't all mess up, and now we're getting ready to rotate those puppies, and they're gonna rotate fast enough that I don't end up with mud, and by the time it's mud season here again, we're gonna be processing some. So there will be fewer animals on my farm at the time of year when things don't grow back as fast. Well, all that is to say, you gotta pretty much tailor things to your individual situation. That's why when I get questions about what are the first 3 things I should do on my homestead, I always say one of those things is observe your land and learn what can happen, what's best for it. Have that linked up to your goals for your property, right? So then we landed in August this year on my homestead, and I've been, slowly building it to my goals. And it's the same thing that happens to every homesteader I know or farmer who actually eats what they raise every year in August, where you end up with this overlap. You have the dog days of summer and you have the crops are ripe and they all kind of hit at the same time. What happens during the dog days of summer is it gets hot as can be. And when it's hot as can be and it's relentless, and maybe you don't get rain, maybe you do get rain, it's hard to keep your plants alive. Your goal at this point in summer, unless you're in a region that has a gentler summer like Oregon, although they haven't this year from what I've heard, is keep my plants alive so that when it cools down a little bit in September and October, I get a second wave of cucumbers and eggplant and all these other things. Like I got one eggplant that's been on strike. It's been on strike for 3 weeks. And I just saw because we got this rain, this cycle of rain in from the hurricane. I saw this little teeny eggplant starting on it and I was like, "Yes, I got you through the dog days, except for it's Tennessee. We're gonna have 5 to 14 more dog days between now and the end of August. Just depends on how the weather goes. I can't control it." So that's happening. At the same time, all your stuff is getting ripe. And then because it's hot as can be, your ripe stuff ripens faster than usual. And then you harvest it and you take it in your house or whatever to process it, and it goes bad faster. So this is the time of year when I'm joking with my friend because we love tomatoes, love fresh tomatoes. You only get fresh tomatoes one time of year. This is that time of year. They're coming off the vine. Nothing like it. The reason I don't like store tomatoes, by the way, is they don't taste like these tomatoes. And so every other time of year, I pretty much just don't buy tomatoes at the store because they taste like mealy crap is what they taste like. And so when it's tomato season, by gum, I'm going to enjoy me some tomatoes. Well, we joke that we take the tomatoes inside and you'll have them on your counter for a day or two because you need to eat them, but you can't eat all the tomatoes at once, or you need to process them and you want to have enough to do a jar or whatever. And some of them go bad. And there's a smell, the going bad tomato smell. None of us like the going bad tomato smell. But the going bad tomato smell happens on the homestead at this time of year because you bring them in. You go back outside and you're like, "Oh, the basil needs to be harvested." And next thing you know, it's 4 hours later. You're at the end of your property looking around dazed, thinking, "Wait, I was going to process those tomatoes." And then you go back up to the house and they've already started to smell. That's how dog days meet everything going ripe. Well, okay, I decided this year I'd like to ramp up the stress, and I decided that I would sign up for Rogue Food Conference to do a booth. And in a good week, it takes me 3 or 4 days to get ready for a trade show after having done the planning of what to print and bring and all that, right? Because I need to roast coffee to sell. I usually sell about 1 pound per 2 people at a conference, so I need to have that in hand, unless it's like Jack's workshop, then there's a totally different ratio there. He has more coffee drinkers, I think, and I need to make sure everything's packed right. I need to make sure there's lodging, how I'm getting there, all of those things, right? Packed is a big deal. Like clean clothes are a great idea at a trade show, not dirty clothes. And I don't actually I'm not one of those people who has a lot of clothing, by the way. So I keep a minimal amount of clothing because if I have a minimal amount of clothing that I like to wear, I feel good in my clothes. And I keep up on laundry because I have to keep up on laundry. So I'm doing laundry once or twice a week just to keep up on normal, like these are the clothes I can wear. And that means that I can't just go a week without doing laundry and then go to a trade show, right? I've got to that cycle has to happen. And then it ended up being beans and tomato week. Yeah. You're having the dog days of summer and you're preparing for the knowns. And the knowns are that nobody's going to have enough water on the homestead, so I got to keep up on water. And that's from plants to animals to people is true if it's not raining. I need to make sure before I'm going out of town that all of my subscription customers, I've pre-roasted their stuff so it can ship when the order comes through. All of my coffee club members get their coffee so it's not at the end of the month when they get it, which has happened one time and that does not make me happy. And I need to know that winter is coming, and if I do not preserve food that I have sourced locally or from my homestead, I'm gonna have to eat store food this winter, and I don't think that's very healthy for me. So I need to preserve stuff. And of course, it's beans and tomato week, as I mentioned earlier. So the reason I have moved from more homestead grown stuff in my garden to locally sourcing it is because the coffee business has grown and is taking a lot of time. And this year, in an effort to find balance, which is my word of the year, which means downtime for me too, time for me to do things I like in addition to, I mean, I like my job, I like this podcast, I like roasting coffee, but you know what I mean, like things you like that aren't your work. Need to do that. Time to reset the brain, time to get exercise in my body, like all of those things. See friends. Seeing friends is fun. I locally source because I know the farmers and I know every year they have a bunch and I love, like, my passion is preserving food, right? You can ask me almost anything about preserving food and I know about it because I've tried it except for water glassing eggs. I just love it that much. I'm gonna try it. Also retort canning. I haven't played with that, but I'm working on it. Um, so that's when I looked at establishing a balance in my life, I was like, okay, I'll grow these things in these places on my homestead, and then I'll try to grow things in these other places that may or may not work, and it didn't this year. Prioritize income and the coffee business and the podcast and the coaching services I do. And then I'll locally source from people I know anyway, because I used to work at the farmer's market, right? And when they have a bunch come in, I'll can it. Well, I just, Rogue Food came up and I'm like, I'm going to go do that. And then this emergency medical class at Tactical Response in Camden came up and I'm going to go do that because that's been a hole in my personal development, my personal education for a long time. And we landed on Saturday. By Saturday, I had 60 pounds of tomatoes and 2 bushels of beans to process, 1 day to get ready, a friend coming from Arizona who I was gonna meet in Knoxville to visit her, and the need to be in Camden, Tennessee by 6 PM that night with myself packed and ready for a 2-day medical class. Then I was gonna come home for 1 day, roast coffee, and pack the car again. Mama Sauce was arriving on that day that I was home, and we were gonna drive to Virginia and do Rogue Food Conference together and then drive home. See, it sounds impossible, doesn't it? But this is not unusual for a typical summer day in the homestead. It may not be that, holy cow, all the events I have for the summer are all in 1 week, but it might be I have a family reunion and the cherries on my cherry tree got ripe. And those need to be you don't just let cherries sit around on a tree. They're going to be gone when you get back, right? You're fighting the birds for those anyway. So it's not unusual this happens. It's not, the why doesn't matter. It just matters that it happened. So my hopes going into this set of green beans and tomatoes was salsa, because we still have some salsa left from last year's canning, but we don't have enough for the winter. Dilly beans, because I like dilly beans, and the stringless dilly beans are the best way to have it. And then canned green beans, so we have enough for the winter. And I have a comment from the live feed, and it's homesteads are living things and they do not wait. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. When the pig gives birth, she gives birth by gum, and you're not going to have her delay. I wish she would have actually given birth 2 days sooner than she did, but she didn't. That is what it is. So those were my hopes. They were great hopes. But then I looked at my schedule and I looked at what I can do. And the thing is, I can't just throw green beans in the freezer and have them turn out well later. I had to process those. Tomatoes, I can do that with. So it was like this risk assessment of, okay, I have all this food, it's all gonna go bad. I've got to get my butt packed and in a sane state of mind so I can do well at this class I'm taking. And I was sharing a room with friends. I got to have enough food for myself that comes from here that I bring with me so I don't have to eat crap on the road, because I always feel bad if I eat crap, and especially knowing I'm only home for 1 day. If I eat crap in that 2 days of period of time and then go to Virginia, I'm gonna feel bad the whole time. So that's not good. So there was a lot of blah, 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 and I realized, you know what? Dilly beans taste great, but they're not that important. And it's faster for me to just can the green beans than to make dilly beans and green beans and salsa. And it's faster for me to just freeze the tomatoes and do salsa when I get back from Polypace than to try to do all of that at one time. So here's how my day started. So here's the background is I was able to work with the farmer and not have to pick these up Saturday morning, pick them up Friday afternoon. Actually, Tactical picked them up for me. Came home with 2 bushels of green beans and actually 80 pounds, not 60 pounds of tomatoes, 4 boxes of tomatoes, 80 pounds. I've said 60 pounds the whole day, and delivered them to the house. And Friday, I worked all day, all day. I worked until it was dinner time, and I had cooked something for dinner, I don't remember what, and finally at dinner time, I got to sit down and eat and watch a TV show with Tactical, and while I was watching that TV show, I was snapping beans because one of the keys to Homestead success is your idle time isn't idle. Sometimes I schedule idle time and stay idle, but your idle time isn't idle. And if you have something like a project like green beans or something that getting seeds out of something for saving seeds or whatever, and you have quote unquote idle time, you can be doing something with your hands while you're watching something, right? Or you can be doing something with your hands while you're talking to somebody. In fact, I've found if people visit and see me snapping beans, they jump in and help me snap beans. I teach them how to snap beans. More beans get snapped. So I managed to get about 8 jars worth of beans snapped before bed, put them in the fridge so they'd stay good. I don't want to freeze beans, right? Went to bed, and here's how Saturday looked. Now, understand, my goals for Saturday are clothes are clean and packed, food is planned for the next 3 days, and I'm ready to pack it when I leave because you don't just, like, leave Steve I don't leave raw meat sitting around. I like to take it straight from the freezer into the cooler, and I need these beans processed, and I need the tomatoes in a state that they're not gonna go bad, so when I come back, I can do salsa, but also hot as heck outside, and I need to make sure everything stays water. I've just planted some plants that are perennial plants on Sage's grave, so I don't want those to die. And, planting in August isn't the best time, but that timing was out of my control. I've got trees that I'll be putting in the ground in September, probably on Green Chili Day on the 18th. And those need to stay alive that I've been babying all summer long. And things are ripe in my own garden. I've got a basil explosion. I've got cucumbers coming on, and if you do not continue picking cucumbers as they get ripe, the plant will just give up the ghost, and you'll end up with big yellow inedible cucumbers that are seeds, good for seeds, but not good for anything else. Like all of that's going on, right? Whew. So here's how Saturday went. Luckily, I had snapped those beans the night before. I skipped the farmer's market because I had picked up the vegetables Friday afternoon instead of Saturday morning when I usually get up. So 6 a.m. I was up, had my coffee, walked the dogs because if I get a walk and my dogs get a walk in the morning, everything goes better for the whole day. And even though felt a time pressure of getting this all done, I was like, I'm taking that walk. I'm taking it for me. I'm taking it for the dogs. Plus, I'm going out of town and the dogs get a little weepy when I'm out of town. And then before jumping into projects, I assembled the laundry I needed to wash. I divided it into loads and was ready to go. So that took me from 6 to 6:30. It was a shorter walk than usually. I usually walk about twice as long, but I was like a short walk is better than no walk, and there is a time pressure today, so I'm going to do it. Got back home, started the water boiling for the green beans because to can green beans, you put them in the jar and you cover them with boiling water, and then you process them in a pressure canner. You can add salt if you want to. I usually don't. I add salt on the other side. And I then, before snapping more beans to get them ready, I started my laundry. I packed the jars I was gonna need to do while waiting for the water to boil, had a second cup of coffee that I was drinking as I go, and I looked at 80 pounds of tomatoes. And I had my jars ready for the water, waiting for the water to boil. I started coring those tomatoes and packing them back in the boxes they came from, but I was able to fit more tomatoes per box after they're cored because they're smaller, right? And got them back in the boxes so I could put the individual boxes in my chest freezer. That was 6:30. By 6:45, it was time to put the first batch of green beans in the canner, so I did, all the while doing the tomatoes. By 7 a.m., I had all 80 pounds of tomatoes cored and in the boxes, and the boxes in the freezer. Okay? This is before many people have gotten up. I had this all done, and then the pigs were having the best morning of their life because they got tomato scraps. They got all the cores. So I was running down the hill and, like, dumping them every time I needed to out of my big bowl that I put that stuff in, and they were starting to get excited every time they saw me come out into the yard, and then that's actually getting some hydration into the pigs and calories into the pigs that I don't have to buy. So that's also good, right? Because pigs are great at processing your scraps. Well, 7 a.m. I'm sorry, 7:15 a.m. I began finally snapping beans. And at that point, when I'm snapping beans, there is like Nothing else I can do but listen to podcasts or watch TV or, like, listen to TV, really. So I was sitting there snapping beans at 7:15 in the morning, and then every so often changing the laundry and getting that going, like, walking around doing that. By 7:45, the first batch of green beans was canned, and I was using an electric canner that day because I knew I could keep up snapping to volume of the electric canner, and then once it's on, I don't have to pay attention to it, so I can really snap beans as fast as I can. I actually had 2 canners, but my neighbor's canner isn't working, so I would have gone a little faster if his canner had not been broken, but that is what it is. So that was my pattern until 1 PM. I would snap beans, prepare jars with the green beans for the canner, process the beans in the canner, rotate the laundry, rotate the boiling water that you need to pour over that, and then every so often, about every hour, I had an alarm set to remind me to do something homesteady. And what I mean by that was go out and check the plants for water, go out and check the plants for nutrients, make and eat breakfast. Very important to feed yourself. And one of the things that happens when you get into Iron Chef canning mode, which is what I was in, is you just, I don't eat, I don't drink. So I set alarm reminders to do that. So we managed to get breakfast in, and that went on till 1 PM. Meanwhile, and this is what made it possible for me to really concentrate on this, Tactical was on animal care. So he was making sure all the animals were fed, double checking their water was up to date, looking at some of the things that need water that are out of my zone 1 basically, and then his zone 1, he takes care of his own zone 1, 1 to 1:30 lunch break. I can't even remember what I ate. It was probably like pickled stuff and cut up cheese and sausage, and that was it. It was not a big lunch, and the occasional green bean that I'm eating while I'm snapping them, right? That is exactly how it went. Welcome to the live feed, Mona. And so that was how it went. And then I went back to the bean cycle. I watched an entire season of some random show on Amazon Prime because I have Amazon Prime right now still. And it was just going on in the background while I was snapping beans and doing all the laundry and all of these other things. I call that the bean cycle, by the way. The bean cycle usually happens one bushel at a time, but I really knew this was the last time I was going to get stringless beans. And it's so much faster to can stringless beans than stringed beans that I was all over it, right? In fact, I don't even grow stringed beans because I hate doing that so much, especially because if you miss one string in a jar, it's like you eat the beans later and there's a string in your mouth, and that's totally not fun at all. Not at all. So by 3 PM, I had been doing that cycle and I remembered, oh crap, I have goat's milk in the fridge. I'm going out of town for a week. Now what do I do? So I started the mozzarella. I started the mozzarella because I gotta make cheese because I'm not gonna eat that milk, and then I'm gonna freeze the mozzarella, and I'll have it in the winter. It'll be awesome. I'll have fresh, frozen mozzarella. And while I was on the breaks in the cheese, which is waiting for it to get up to temperature and that sort of things, I continued the bean cycle. And it was during that time that I came to the realization that I was not actually gonna get my clothes packed on Saturday. It took me till 3 PM to admit to myself, or 4 PM or 5 PM, I wasn't really gonna pack, although my laundry was clean. So at least on Sunday, when I madly packed for this 2-day thing, I was gonna be in a much better place, right? This is how the homestead denial works, in case you don't know. But that is what it is. By 7 PM, I had screwed up the mozzarella cheese and ended up accidentally making farmer's cheese, which was fine. We've got that cheese now. And Tactical, like, wandered into my house, probably wondering what might be for dinner. And had I thought about dinner? Heck no, I was in the bean cycle. And when you're in the bean cycle, you don't think about dinner unless you thought about dinner at the beginning of the day and started a crock pot, which would have been really smart. But it's not what I did, right? It is not what I did. So there was no plan for dinner. However, I'm a homesteader, and I know this happens sometimes, and it usually happens in a time pressure situation like this. So I initiated one of the most important rip cords that we keep in the holler, and that is the cauliflower pizza crust. That's right. There's a frozen cauliflower pizza crust that I have in the freezer, ready to go for the day I didn't plan. It's one step away from bad, because worse would be I initiate the Chinese food ripcord, which means you drive to town and get Chinese food and come back, right? Which, I mean, I like Chinese food, but it's not the healthiest, and it's certainly not gonna make my gut feel great when I'm going out of town. Anyway, I initiated that, and I used fresh made tomato sauce and on-site sausage and cheese, and we had pizza for dinner. Yep. And what I really like is fresh pizza anyway at this time of year because you get the fresh tomatoes, you get the fresh basil, and it's super yummy. So by 8 p.m., dinner was ready. I was still in the bean snapping cycle, and Tactical watched the TV show with me. And I would just get up in the middle of the show and you know, change the canning stuff over or start the water to boil or continue snapping beans. And when I had a full bowl of beans, those went in the fridge and I started another bowl and then it'd be time to fill jars and then the bowl would be empty again. And then the whole cycle just went on and on and on. By 9 p.m., I was still in the bean cycle except for this. I had finished snapping 2 bushels of beans. That's right. It basically took me all day with in between chores to snap 2 bushels of beans while I was also canning them. So there was a lot of multitasking tasking going on. But here's the best part. I was exhausted. It was 9 p.m. I knew I needed to drive about 6 hours the next day between different things I needed to do and pack my clothes. And I decided rather than push through and take the rest of the snap beans and can them till midnight, which is probably, I mean, it probably would have been 10 or 11, but just keep canning them, right? I would do something smart and I would go to bed and I would sleep. And I would get up in the morning and can what I could before I left. And that was going to be the green beans for the winter because that's reality. But here's how my house looked, guys. My house looked like there had been a green bean food fight because I'd been snapping beans the whole time, and sometimes the beans fly, right? I have a shirt that says sometimes the beans come out from for hollow roast because sometimes I spill coffee beans while I'm filling the bags. Also, when you're snapping green beans, sometimes you snap it and it's like bloop, and it just flies. And then I have this, bin for the pieces of beans we're not eating, and I have the bin for the ones that are snapped, and the bin for the ones that aren't snapped. And occasionally a dog walks by and you just hand them a green bean and they think that's really cool and then they carry it around the house. So my house looked like Bean Mageddon. It looked like food fight land. It was hilarious. There were green beans everywhere. It's like when I used to cook bread, bake bread, I would get flour all over the place and then have to vacuum everything because I walk around in between things with like flour on my hands. Looked the same way. And worse, like every flat surface in my kitchen had jars cooling from being canned because I had done such a high volume. There were 30 jars of green beans all over the place cooling in addition to whatever else was going, and the canner was on the counter. So that takes up some space. There was hardly anywhere left where you could even put anything. And I can't move the hot jars to my dining table because the wood would not, handle that very way. And I just looked at that and I was like, la 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 la, denial, denial. And I just went to bed. I just went to bed. And I got up the next morning, 6 a.m., and I started water for the jars to do my last batch of jars of green beans because I'd put the snap green beans in the fridge, of course. And I took the dogs on a short walk like I always do. And I got back and the water was boiling and I put the green beans in that canner. It was my last 4 jars. Prepared breakfast, swept the floor. Because by that point, the bean food fight situation was actually bugging me. And so I got all the beans off the floor, got them all in the bin of bean scraps for the pig, which, again, it's a good day for a pig when you can't can green beans, right? And by 7 a.m. when I left, because I had to leave at 7, I had the last batch of green beans finishing up in the canner. Tactical knew what to do about that. It's an electric canner, so it will turn itself off when it's done. And I headed out to see a friend I hadn't seen in person in about 12 years, which is why I was willing to go through these lengths. It's because I hadn't seen her in 12 years, and she was a very good friend in college. We lived together. So I got to go see her. And the way I got ready for this class, by the way, is on my way back, I had a 2-hour window of time that I could pack my food. And that's what I did. I got back, packed, roasted and shipped some coffee orders, jumped back in the car, and went on to take my emergency medical class. That is a typical day on the homestead. You may not have all the driving away with it, but what you will have is all your tomatoes ripe on the same day at the same time that your green beans or your squash or your blueberries or something else. And then you're going to have an animal get heat stroke that you got to go help. That's just how life on a homestead is. And you got to be ready to be flexible. And you have to know, you have to learn things. And this is what happens when you're on a homestead. You start learning what can be put off and how it can be put off. Like the tomatoes can be frozen. They're actually a little easier to can if you freeze them first, right? And they also blueberries the same way. You can freeze them if you need to, then make jam out of them or whatever you're gonna do. I think the biggest lesson I've gotten from living on a homestead is even when I have an impossible schedule, even when I know there's no way I can get this all done, I'm able to triage it and prioritize it as long as I keep the priorities in mind before I jump in. I'm able to triage stuff that can be put off, and I'm able to prioritize what needs to be done, and if I do one step at a time steadily, I'm usually successful in getting the impossible done. That's part of why I love living on a homestead, that and, like, the awesome food you get from your own land, right? But the other part of that coin is sometimes your house looks like Bean-mageddon for a few days, because sometimes you have so much going on that chaos reigns. This week is a dechaotic chaos week. We're gonna take the chaos away because even though I cleaned up some of the chaos, not all of the chaos. Like, I came back for one day and roasted coffee and packed and left again, right? There's chaos here. So, this week, I knew going in, it's catch up on everything week, and it's also get it back to the baseline. Because if I don't get it back to the baseline, eventually it's just too much chaos, and too much chaos is not good. So, I think homestead life is really fun and high energy, but sometimes it's a lot of work, and this time of year when you've got the dog days coming in and the ripe things coming out of your garden and you're getting ready for the fall crops, you just gotta take it one step at a time, keep your priorities in mind, and go for it and enjoy it while you can. With that, if you like the show and the work I do, you can support me in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollerroast.com. 2, become a member over at livingfreeintennessee.com. As a reminder, we do have the mozzarella making webinar coming up on August 26th, free to members. So get signed up before then and take a cheese class. With that, go out, make it a great week. Okay, YouTube land, any questions before I sign off? Now that you can hear me. Did you talk about how the piggies are doing already? If not, how are they? Mona, the piggies are doing great. I actually did, I was gonna neuter them myself to learn how to neuter pigs. And what happened, and you neuter them at 2 weeks. Well, it was 2 weeks in, and I didn't know how to neuter them, and I know I can look at YouTube and learn, but if I make a mistake and kill a pig, I only have 5 piglets to begin with, and I wasn't ready the little piglet to that, so I hired a vet to neuter 2 of the males, 1 male for breeding. So they're all neutered, they've made it through that just fine, and they're ready to be trained to rotationally graze, so that's where we're at now. I'm actually gonna reach out to somebody and see if I can lease some extra land to move them on just because not all my land is perfect for that, right? So, I'll be doing that, and then, um, that's how the piggies are doing. They're doing pretty well. Uh, any other questions before I go? We are planning to do that processing workshop. I'm wondering, does this mic work? Okay. For a second there, I thought maybe I was coming over my computer mic, which would have made me cry maybe. I would have to record the podcast again if that happened. That's not scary at all. It's totally scary. Yeah. Anyway, no other questions? Okay, guys, thanks for joining in the live feed. We'll be doing this every Monday. That's my plan, unless something comes up. Like last Monday, I was in a class and couldn't. So just I try to get it done in the morning before my assistant goes to bed because he's in another time zone, and I've been having him do the web production and the push out from there. So anyway, I'll talk to you next Monday.